Hello everyone, welcome to our Final Fantasy XIV Beginner's Guide. Today, I'll be starting my 3-part guide to playing DPS, starting off with the caster role. Right off the bat, I want to say that all 3 caster jobs are a pretty good option to play with. I'm saying 3 because to the dismay of many veteran players, Blue Mage is only a limited job, meaning it cannot really go into any current content sadly. Now, you might be watching this video because you have played other roles, but none of them had cast times such as tanks, melee DPS or physical range. You want to give casting a try and are not sure how to get into it, so to help with that, I'll try my best to give you some basic tips to get you started. Despite only having 3 casters in the lineup, they're extremely diverse and with unique quirks to not make them feel same-ish, but you might still want to do a bit of research on each to determine which one you want to try the most. If after watching this video you still won't be sold on any of the 3 of them, feel free to go to the Balance Discord server where you will find comprehensive guides on all jobs on Final Fantasy XIV, including the ones I talk about in my videos, which will be able to give you greater detail about every job in the game. More than I'll be able to in this video at any rate. My first and most important tip to start off with is getting used to your spell so you can learn how to cast uninterrupted. When you're brand new, you'll drop everything you're doing so you can dodge attacks, meaning you'll end up not casting anything for maybe a few seconds. It's a pretty normal thing early on since you won't have that many tools to help you with it, but the further up you go in levels, the more skills and abilities you unlock that will allow you, as you gain more and more experience with the role, to bob and weave your way out of mechanics while still casting on the fly, limiting the amount of time spent not casting. Fortunately, as I said earlier, there are tools that allow you to do that, and every one of these 3 mages has its unique ways of dealing with it. Starting with Summoner, I can guarantee you that he's the most mobile caster by far out of the 3. It has Aegis Assault, 2 pet abilities that are instant cast and give you access to Rain 4, another instant cast spell. If you can't use either of those, you can just fall back to Rain 2, which is an instant cast spell that is not as potent, but it's better than casting nothing at all and may be necessary at certain times. You also have your 2 trances, Threadworm and Firebird, which allow you to use DPS skills without casting. All of these options eventually link together to make Summoners hilariously mobile, to the point where you can consider it the caster equivalent of a ranged physical DPS. Don't get me wrong, however, Summoner does require a great deal of skill to fully understand. You will eventually end up following a set rotation, and that rotation will sometimes prevent you from being able to save these abilities for movement, making you think about how you can avoid downtime in mechanics. Mastering Summoner comes from figuring out when you should save a few instant spells to move, or thinking when your trances line up with long movement phases to constantly move while doing mechanics. Once you get the hang of it, you'll probably just sit and laugh while watching the other people in your group struggle to do the mechanics. On the other hand, I think Red Mage is more complicated than people give it credit. Red Mage has a trait called Dual Cast, which makes every other spell be instant, giving them bursts of short-term movement. You want to try to weave these bursts of movement between spells to get to places from where you can dodge attacks safely. If you need more movement, your rotation might be a big help. The Red Mage's melee combo and the finishers to it are all instant, so you have the freedom of movement during that at the cost of being in melee range. Enchanted Reprise allows you to cast on the move at the cost of 5 white and black mana, which, unless you don't use it too much, ends up being very effective, and you also have Swift Cast to give you some time to move unless you need it for a res. 2 other tools you have at your disposal as a Red Mage are your Backflip and your Gap Closer. They help with repositioning around the arena, and if you time this right, you can use your Gap Closer to go in for your big burst right after the mechanic is over. This takes the mastery of the job and the encounters, but you'll find it much easier to approach fights and fight movement as a Red Mage, at least on a basic level. One thing to keep in mind is not to use potions or sprint when you have a dual cast proc up, because it will consume the proc, screwing you over in the process. You also have a trick to use to get a guaranteed dual cast proc after downtime. By using Valkyrie on yourself, you guarantee that you will have an instant cast spell ready as soon as the boss becomes targetable after forced downtime. Finally, we have Black Mage, which is actually way more mobile this expansion despite popular belief, but it requires a good deal of fight knowledge to be played effectively. It's why I personally wouldn't recommend it to beginners or during proc, because if you're not very familiar with the fight, you sometimes tunnel vision and it leads to proc impediment. Black Mage is more straightforward with tools. They have triple cast, which is like 3 swift casts back to back, swift cast itself, other procs that allow them to move while casting, Xenoglossy, another instant cast ability which is ready every 30 seconds, and they can also dash with their party members and ley lines. These tools are amazing for movement, but like Summoner's tools are part of Black Mage's rotation, meaning that you'll be using them to DPS on the job normally. It becomes a lot about knowing when to use these tools to deal damage, or whether you need to save them for movement in the next few seconds. Mastering these tools only comes with constant practice, but once you really get used to it, it will feel like you can't be stopped from casting spells, except during forced downtime, of course. Black Mage has some tools to maintain resources while they're moving for mechanics during these moments of forced downtime, such as Umbral Soul. Now that we've discussed specifics about casters, let's look at their role actions. I'm sure you'll notice that most of them are not that different from what healers have, with one exception. You need to get comfortable with them, something you should do with any role when you play it for the first time. Casters have Swift Cast, which lets them cast a spell instantly, simple as that. You can combine this with the resurrection abilities on Summoner or Red Mage to be able to get people up instantly, or use it for extra movement options. Since Black Mage has no resurrection ability whatsoever, you can use it only for movement or squeezing that extra ability out. Surecast prevents knockback and your spells getting interrupted. You want to use this when bosses use abilities that knock you back or pull you in, and sometimes it's the difference between being alive and still casting, or getting killed and losing your ability to cast. Lucid Dreaming restores mana over time. Summoners and Red Mages should use this as much as possible, as it's their only way of restoring mana during a fight. Black Mage has a special way of restoring mana in the form of Umbral Ice, and it cannot regenerate mana during Astral Fire, so it doesn't benefit as much from it, but it does have some high skill ways of using it still. Finally, we got Adel. This reduces the target's intelligence and mind by 10%, making it so enemies deal less magic damage and possibly heal for less, although this usually isn't the case in most boss fights. It is a very popular tool to use for mitigating magical attacks on bosses, especially raid wides. There's no in-game way to tell if an attack is physical or magical, so if it looks magic-y, assume Adel works and throw it on there for mitigation. I have a few more tips that apply generally to all casters. Another very special tool for movement is actually a technique called Slidecasting. Everyone plays this game with smaller or bigger ping, and you can abuse that to start moving towards the end of the cast bar to get a bit of movement without cancelling your cast. You won't move more than a couple of steps, but if you do this continuously for a few spells and get into your goal position ahead of time, it can really help a lot. This technique is less prevalent depending on which mage you are playing. Summoner has a lot of instant casts, but they can still use it if they have to spam Ruin 3. Red Mage, while they have dual cast, they can still do it on the first cast before they proc it to get that extra bit of distance in. For Black Mages, it's extremely prevalent. It's a great technique to master even on jobs that aren't necessarily casters, like Samurai for example, and their Midare Setsugeka and things like that. Finally, it's time for some serious talk. You might be a ranged DPS and you might get a teensy bit too focused on casting, but unless you have a defensive tool available or you're talking to your healers beforehand that you'll do something in a specific way, try not to be in the middle of nowhere when you're playing a ranged DPS. Healers concentrate their AoE heals around the center of the room, or at least near the majority of the party. So basically standing along the edge of the arena is something that requires special attention, not just something you do because you don't have to stay in melee range. Keep an eye out for things like healer bubbles or defensive tools from your team. However, if staying alive isn't something that's to your interest, maybe I can convince you to stay close to your team by saying that if you don't stay next to them, you might not hit your teammates with your buffs, or you might not get hit by theirs, meaning you'll deal less damage than you would have otherwise, making this a very big tip for all ranged players, not just casters. Overall, caster DPS is more about individual job tools and less about the overall rule like the other roles are. All three casters play so differently that you will have to try all three of them to get a feel for them. And honestly, I think all of them are in a good spot as they are right now, even though I particularly am not a fan of casting. Here's hoping that they don't mess up the mobility of the Minion Walker. With that, it's time to wrap up my beginner guide to casting. This was a video on the shorter side compared to the previous ones, but one that should give the information you might need. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you've liked it, and maybe even subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Check out my Twitch channel too, link will be in the description. I haven't streamed in a while due to my location, but I'll be starting again soon and you'll be able to ask me questions there. Alternatively, drop some questions in the comments down below and I'll try my best to reply to them all. Anyway, that's it from me for now. See you next time. Take care.